Volkswagen has been in hibernation mode in India for some time, but come late 2020, it will go on a product offensive like never before. And it all starts with this. So here it is, finally in the flesh, Volkswagen's new T Cross. It's based on the MQB A0 and we have the car for the day in sunny Mallorca. But wait, this isn't exactly the car we'll get in India. Ours will be called the A0iN, and that car will have longer doors at the back, a bigger wheelbase and more space on the inside. But fundamentally, this car will be almost the same. Let's see what it's like. Volkswagen designers have done a good job with the European T Cross. On the one hand, it's neat and tidy, and on the other, it's also full of exciting details, a balance that's not easy to achieve. What's even more important is that VW designers have got the stance right. The high bonnet, the upright cabin, the strong shoulder line, they all work extremely well. And the wheels are just the right size. As the T Cross is targeted at a younger audience, the skinning is also a bit more aggressive than standard Volkswagen fare. What helps complete the picture is the crisp detailing, the strong chin, the squared out fog lights, and what I really like is how the horizontal LED strips in the headlights link up with each other via the chrome strip in the grille. And even at the rear, the integrated taillights look cool. The European T Cross isn't very big, it's just 4.1 meters long and 1.58 meters tall. The T Cross, however, is quite roomy on the inside because it's a substantial 1.78, almost 1.8 meters wide. And Volkswagen, quite smartly, have used a high seating position. But that's not all that awaits you in the cabin. Let's step into the cabin and immediately you're hit by these two screens. Now this is a large touchscreen which has a lot of functions, but you also get this instrument panel in digital, and like the Audi, you can cycle the views from here and go from the tachometer to the navigation to information, and it's beautifully crisp and clear and very intuitive to use. And the best part, Volkswagen will be bringing this feature to the Indian car as well. In fact, there are a lot of high-tech features on this car, including wireless phone charging, a 300-watt Beats audio system, and even sensor-based safety tech. But how much of that comes to India is anyone's guess. Volkswagen, however, have gone a bit overboard with the design of the rest of the dash, especially some of the most outlandish ones you can order. Yes, the textures and artificial grains work well, but the additional colors and the designs and patterns lack the sophistication you expect of a Volkswagen. The T Cross also has almost no soft touch or padded sections, and this makes the cabin feel kind of basic. Still, you can't fault the quality of the material they've used. Seat comfort on this car is also excellent. We may get slightly different seats for India, but here, lovely thigh support, good support for the back, and the driving position is fabulous. Again, a beautifully designed steering wheel, fantastically finished. And the thing with this cabin is there are very few places where you see a low quality plastic part, almost none. In fact, you have to look for them in the lower half of the cabin. It's that good. Also, a lot of practicality, huge storage box here, 2 cup holders, an elbow box, place for your phone, a nice rubberized tray here, and 2 USB sockets for the front seats. All in all, a really well put together cabin. So in the back, and as you can see, the seating position is pretty high up, so even this amount of leg room is pretty sufficient. I can stretch my legs out or I can hold them back, and back support and elbow support here is pretty good. There's no elbow rest on the center, but once the car comes to India with its longer wheelbase, we should see modifications like this elbow rest, maybe a vent here and other stuff like that. But already there's 2 USBs here, very important in today's day and age. And this car has a unique feature which could make it onto the Indian car as well. Watch this. Require a bit more space in the boot. All you do is slide this forward. Pretty cool. And you'll want to slide the seat because doing so can expand luggage space from 385 liters all the way to 455. Now, interestingly, this car won't be getting a diesel engine. But the good news is that it gets a strong set of turbocharged petrol motors, a 1 litre and a 1.5, and today we're driving the smaller of the two. Yes, at 115 horsepower, this 3-cylinder engine might seem insufficient for the job, but that's not entirely true. Now, the 3-cylinder TSI engine has a bit of turbo lag. The power really does come in around 3000 RPM, and then it pulls nicely and cleanly all the way to around 5000. The red line is around 6500, and it does get a bit noisy at that time. But performance in general is pretty strong and honestly quite surprising for an engine of this capacity. Now in India we'll get the 6-speed manual, and I can tell you this gearbox is pretty exceptional. It's light, it's easy to use, it's got a nice rubbery feel to it. You never ever miss a gear. It's just a pleasure to use. Again, well done Volkswagen. And if you find the manual a bit too inconvenient, there will be a DSG dual clutch as well on both engines. On its taller springs and its big tires, the T Cross actually rides pretty well. It takes bumps like that in its stride, and despite the fact that there is a bit of stiffness in the chassis, you're extremely comfortable and can carry a lot of speed over even broken patches and bumpy sections. What Volkswagen have also nailed is the steering. At low speeds, it's light and easy to use and has a sort of liquidy, oily feel to it. But get up to speed, get into a few corners, and it actually weighs up beautifully and delivers a lot of confidence. Now in the tighter bits, there is quite a bit of body roll, and that's only to be expected. But it still isn't the sort where you get a bit nervous and slow down, and you can carry a lot of speed into corners. When the T Cross comes to India in 2020-2021, it'll be quite different from the car driven here. More spacious, more comfortable, and bigger on the inside, it will give Indian customers what they want. Yes, a diesel engine is unlikely, but what the European version of the T Cross has shown us today is that VW is at the top of its game when it comes to SUVs, even compact ones. Attractive to look at, refined, comfortable, versatile, excellent to drive, and with an all-round performance that smacks of deadly intent, this is a car that has huge potential. Get the price right, as VW says it will, and what you have here is an SUV with the potential to be a winner. Keep an eye on this one.
Us sport bike enthusiasts in India have spent many years fueled by dreams that have been impossible to achieve. But in the recent past, that's been changing, and one by one, these dreams are starting to become a reality. Unfortunately, one of these dreams, and possibly the most important one, has stayed out of reach for far too long. And that's the ability to legally get your hands on a Japanese 600cc super sport. Well, dear viewers, today you need to thank Kawasaki, because that's about to change. The timing of the 6R's arrival in India is quite ironic because it comes at a period where the demand for 600cc super sports is dying out in mature markets as buyers seek to move to bigger and more versatile machines. In fact, the ZX-6R isn't a true 600 either because Kawasaki smartly raised the capacity to 636cc a few years ago to give the bike a more usable mid-range. Now you won't find us complaining about this, and neither will you see us crib about the sizable update that the bike received for 2019. It's this updated Euro 4 compliant model that makes it to our shores. So let's not waste any more time and see if this is the kind of bike that lives up to the high pedestal that we've placed it on. So how does all this dreamy stuff bear out in reality? Well, let's start with the feel-good factor. Sitting on the 6R immediately has you feeling like you're sitting on a big bike, and it puts you in a very racy riding position. So while your wrists and back probably won't be happy about it at all, will it make you look like you just rode off the sets of a mindless Bollywood blockbuster? Oh yes. Given the formula of this bike, it would be silly to expect a comfortable riding position. But it still bears mentioning that the ergonomics are going to be the biggest drawback over the 6R's practicality in our riding environment. Now the foot pegs aren't positioned too extremely, but the clip-on bars are seriously low, to the point that your wrists are positioned below your backside. But a tall rider like myself will fit on the bike, and my memory suggests that it's not as tightly scrunched up as a Triumph Daytona. As with many serious supersports, the seat height isn't very short rider friendly as well, but the 2019 update has narrowed the seat near the fuel tank, which makes it easier to get your feet down. Happily though, aside from the demands that it makes of your core strength, the 6R is one of the most usable supersports I've ever ridden on our roads. And that's primarily down to one reason.
That reason would be the suspension. Now the ZX-6R is designed to destroy the racetrack, and it packs the suspension components to get the job done. But surprisingly, the very same suspension on its stock settings is pleasantly comfortable on the street, so much so that I eventually gave up on the extreme caution we usually hold on bikes like this and just rode through whatever came my way.
In fact, the 6R lures you into such a casual state of mind over rough roads that you do need to remind yourself every now and again that you're riding a bike without much suspension travel and low profile tires, and that you must be careful to protect the rims. Nevertheless, on the happy note of knowing that the ZX-6R can handle our roads, let's shift focus to the reason that you should be buying a 600cc supersport, the performance.
That was so much fun. This is a screamer of an engine. It makes its peak power 13,500 RPM, but it actually revs higher than that. And the red line is just under 16,000 RPM. Now chasing that marking on the big analog tachometer, that's a whole different kind of rush.
The Kawasaki's engine really is a special thing, so much so that not much has changed in the 2019 update. In fact, the motor actually lost a tiny amount of power in the conversion to Euro 4, but it still makes a solid 130 horsepower. Like most supersports, that power lives up high in the rev range, and the 6R is quite a docile thing at low revs, a fact reinforced by the bunching up of the numbers for the first 4,000 RPM on the rev counter. Things get interesting at 6,000 RPM, seriously fast by the time you hit 8,000 RPM, and then an all-out, head-banging scream fest when you cross 10,000 RPM. Keep it nailed in first gear, and the bike will slam into the limiter at about 120 km/h, with the next 5 gears arriving in rapid succession. Top speed is said to be somewhere in the region of 260 kph. For 2019, the 6R also gets a new quick shifter, which is the smoothest I've experienced to date. In fact, it's so good that I immediately started to miss having an auto blipper for quick and easy downshifts to match. The electronics are otherwise unchanged, and the bike continues to offer 3 stages of traction control, ABS, and 2 power modes. To sum up, the 6R is smooth, thrilling, and it makes a fantastic noise. But what I like the most is that this engine is not only easy to use, but it's also exciting at reasonably sensible speeds, and that's not something you can say for most of the bigger 1000cc superbikes that have been available here so far. However, it is worth keeping in mind that conspicuous sticker on the fuel tank that reminds you of this bike's fuel requirements.
With that screaming rush of power, it's almost a relief that the 6R packs a very well sorted chassis and a great set of brakes.
600cc supersports tend to be expensive propositions because aside from the smaller engine, they offer very similar levels of chassis, suspension and brake technology to full-on liter class superbikes. The 6R is no different, and it uses a chunky aluminium perimeter frame with fully adjustable suspension by Showa at both ends. On the road and at the pace I was riding, I found the stock suspension settings were perfectly up to the job, but it was apparent that the suspension felt a little underdamped when getting hard on the brakes or pushing through a set of bumpy corners. Of course, fixing this is just a few twists of a screwdriver away, and I'm confident that this sub 200 kilo bike will be a serious weapon on the racetrack, with some time spent to find the right suspension setup. As things stand, the 6R is dynamically quite brilliant, and while it's great fun in the street, you'll only fully enjoy what it has to offer on the racetrack.
The focus on performance is so intense that Kawasaki even paid special attention while designing the fuel tank. For starters, there's a big depression along here, which allows the rider to get the head all the way down and take maximum coverage behind the windscreen. And then you have these extensions on the side. And the idea behind these is that when you're leaned off all the way inside a corner, it's a nice place to rest your elbow. Isn't that a clever touch?
Those tank extensions aren't all great though, and they do come in the way when you're taking U-turns, a process that's already quite tedious thanks to the limited steering lock you get on bikes like this. Speaking of ergonomics, the seat is flat and spacious, and even the mirrors work well. You might have noticed that rear seat cowl, and that's because Kawasaki only sells the ZX-6R as a single-seater in India, which is no shame. Using the rear seat on a motorcycle like this is never a very nice experience, both for the rider and the pillion. Perhaps the biggest change for 2019 comes in the styling rework, which now uses a layered design for the fairing. Now you wouldn't be wrong in saying that the 6R looks quite a bit like the Ninja 400, but that's a problem with the entire Ninja family that's starting to look quite a lot like each other. It's also worth mentioning that this is not the most path-breaking of superbikes, and you won't find the latest TFT displays or the likes of IMUs and ride-by-wire throttle here. But you know what? I find that endearing, and it's a great feeling to be able to stare at a big analog rev counter or feel the more natural connection of a cable linking your right hand to the engine. Still, the 6R is not a poorly equipped bike by any means, and you get a full LED headlamp, adjustable levers, and a proper slipper clutch. However, the final update that Kawasaki brought in for 2019 was also one of the sweetest, and that was a significant drop in the price. India reaps the benefits of this too, and the 6R is quite nicely priced, given what you get. In fact, it even slots below the excellent Triumph Street Triple RS. But then again, you could get the more powerful Ninja 1000 Sport Toro for slightly less money. So whether this bike makes sense depends on what experience you're after.
There are a few pointers I want to address in the conclusion of this review. For starters, the ZX-6R is every bit the dream that we've imagined for all these years. It looks great, it's lovely to ride, and it's very, very fast, but not overwhelmingly fast like many 1000cc bikes tend to be. And the fact that it's usable on our roads, well, that's just the icing on the top. So, should you buy this bike? Well, the logical old man who lives in my head will tell you that you're better off with a sporty naked, something like a Triumph Street Triple RS. In fact, while we're at it, he tells you to forget about the sports bike altogether and go get yourself an adventure bike. But here's the thing, every time I ride the 6R, the logic flies out of my head and that dream comes right back in. So here's the final word. If you must have a fared super sport motorcycle, I can't think of a better option in India than the Kawasaki ZX-6R.
This is the Bullet Trials 500, a motorcycle that draws inspiration from some similarly styled models from its past. The most recent of those was the Trials EFI, a bike that featured a 500cc pushrod engine. That bike went on sale in the UK in 2009 and its production lasted only 5 years. That's because it wasn't very brilliant. And to be very honest, neither is this one.
The Bullet Trials is, to be truthful, no more than a classic that's turned into a wannabe SUV thanks to knobby Seat tires and some bits of purposeful looking trim. And not many of you will be too happy to find out it can only seat one person, with the pillion seat being traded in for a luggage rack. Sure, it's better put together than some custom one-offs we may have seen in the past, but it's not exactly pretty or very wholeheartedly designed either, and that can be said even before we get to that wildly upswept exhaust end cam. Unlike on all the cool scramblers we know of, the Trials wears its bend pipe the conventional way rather than by being wrapped around the cylinder head, and the way the end can is angled is definitely debatable, to put it politely.
Having said that, the Trials may appeal hugely to some of you looking for a single-seat, sort of wacky style Bullet. So let's instead find out if it is genuinely as purposeful as its rugged styling suggests.
The 499cc fuel-injected motor has never been an outrageously overwhelming performer, but 27.5 HP and 41.3 Nm aren't exactly modest numbers, and so the 500 Trials does keep things interesting. With no tachometer at hand, you have to rely purely on the sensations you get from the handlebar, foot pegs and tank, and there are lots of those readily available, given that it isn't the most refined Royal Enfield out there.
Then again, Royal Enfield doesn't claim to have reinvented the wheel with the Trials, and instead suggests that this is just a more fun and adventurous take on the Bullet. Thankfully, we have an off-road course to ourselves to find out if this is indeed the truth.
Now, When the first Trials Bullet came out in the late 40s, it was a big deal because it had, wait for this, suspension. But the new Trials offers no such breakthrough. However, the Bullet has always been a simple go-anywhere machine even before the crop of adventure tourers emerged, and so rough roading comes to it rather naturally. The Trials isn't mechanically better equipped for this purpose, so it simply carries on that legacy, with the only noticeable change being the soft roading spec Seat tires. In the real world, you will appreciate it for its ability to take on challenging detours, what with all that construction work we're surrounded with. But at the same time, it certainly has nothing on something like the Himalayan. In other words, it's simply a more visually fulfilling variant to those looking for a little more purposefulness than the standard fare of Bullets. And that's not such a bad thing considering Royal Enfield isn't charging you an exorbitant premium for it. Priced at 2.07 lakh rupees ex-showroom, the 500 Trials is 6,000 rupees more expensive than the classic 500, which is a fair increment. For those of you seeking cheaper thrills, there's a 350 Trials as well, which retails at 1.62 lakh rupees.
That's not to say the Trials isn't gimmicky, but since Royal Enfield was out there to give the Bullet a fun and purposeful makeover, it could have made a more sincere effort than this cool but largely cosmetic job. Then again, because the BS6 models are almost a year away, it is likely that Royal Enfield will give you another line of factory customs to choose from, and maybe one of those is what you're waiting for.
And now it's time for safety tips with Servo Futura G Plus from Indian Oil.